Okay, you can begin.
Good evening, everyone. Today, my group will be presenting on leadership, power, and influence. The members are Nathaniel Noel, Leah James, and myself, Jada Romeo. Today, my group will be presenting on leadership, power, and influence. Having power and influence in the workplace is compulsory. As we go along the presentation, you will discover the different types at disadvantage, as well as example and many other aspects. Powerful and influential leadership are mainly high-class people in society. When you have power in leadership, it means that you have control and the ability to lead and motivate others. Influence is being able to get others to do what you would like them to do, think, or even influence their behavior. As a matter of fact, this can go both ways, whether it's on a negative or positive aspect, as well as tactics. It all depends on the individual.
Good afternoon, class. My name is Leah James, and I will be looking at power. Power is simply known as the influence leaders have over their followers. Analyzing power in leadership sometimes leads to negative examples and negative consequences. For example, said leader would do little to no work with expectations and demands that his or her team would complete all the tasks that are given. And this does not demonstrate the use of ethical power in leadership. Whereas ethical power in leadership would be done by contributing to teams with knowledge, experience, listening, and learning from the team members, ideas, and such as. Can you change this slide? Okay, so we have two pictures here, and I really do hope that you'll know who these are. On the left, we have former President Obama, and on the right would be Hitler, okay? So for the positive forms of power, right? Obama was the 44th US president. He had the power of position. Obama was a man with formal authority that influenced many people. He had the power of charisma. Obama used his charismatic personality to gain credibility among his peers when he was first elected. He also used the power of relationships. For example, the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, emerged as one of Obama's closest allies and friends. And power can be negative. Hitler was a very influential, powerful person. No, he was influential for all the wrong reasons. He used that power he had negatively. He led revolts. He used power of punishment to contain and the Jews in Germany, rising up a German army called the Nazis. He died, however, April 1945, and he was on the front page of the New York Times paper, which stated, "A fitting end to a wretched life." Because of his negative use of power, he wasn't liked, he wasn't praised for what he did, but he would go down in history negatively as a bad person, quote unquote. Next slide, please. Now, These are the types of power, some of the types of power, right? So there is legitimate. This is power. Power would be ranking in an organization. They can influence employees because of their position, as the lower ranking employees would simply abide by their direction. Cohesive, power that occurs through threats or force, like Hitler used. Referent power. This takes interest in others, listening, taking advice. These are examples of the positive power as we looked back on President Obama, as well as charisma, the nature of attractiveness or charm that inspires positivity, a persuasive nature. That was also Obama. And there is a reward power. This offers rewards and gifts as encouragement. This can be like a very strong influence or power people have over others. Like, look at the power a parent would have on their child, knowing that, do this, get all A's, and I promise that you would get so and so, right? That's a reward power. There's also moral power. This inspires belief and behavior led by principles others can follow. And there is connection power that comes from well-known relationships with powerful people. And founder, for example, which is obvious, the power who starts the organization, the business, so on. Next slide, please. So these are some really short tactics that help with power, right? There's rational persuasion. This is a tactic that is used to try and convince someone with a valid reason, a rational logic, or a realistic fact. There are also consultations, a tactic that focuses on getting others to participate in the planning process, making decisions, and encourages change. Personal appeals. This is a tactic that refers to friendship and loyalty while making just a simple request. And there is integration, a tactic that emphasizes on getting someone in a good mood prior to making a request. It includes being friendly, helpful, or using praise and flattery. Next slide, please. So these will be touching on the myths that people have about power, right? So power equals cash votes, muscle, and position. Power can be more than the things listed above. Psychological power is one's capacity to alter another's life, their condition or state of mind, or even withhold resources such as knowledge, sex, money, affection. Now we can think about many examples of this, right? We could go and touch on sex and affection, right? See the woman, for example, does not want to give a man these things and therefore withholds that power from him. This being a type of power that is commonly used a lot. So, next slide, please. Right. This is Machiavellism wins power. This is a myth. Machiavellism is a personality that is centered around being callous and manipulative in psychology to maintain power. Now, these people, they occur a lot throughout history and even right now. They want to stay in a position of power. Therefore, they turn employees against employees, people on teams against each other just to get where they need to go. Next slide, please. Another myth is power is never given. It is believed that power should always be strategically acquired. However, we see that these days and like lower down in history, there are lots of family owned businesses. So for example, the father would pass on the business to the son would pass on that business to his son, and that business would just stay in the family without strategically gaining it. So therefore it is given. Now we see a lot of ways that power can affect people, and sometimes it is positive and sometimes a lot of the times it is negatively used. But that does not mean that power is always negative. I'll now pass you on to my other group member who would be talking about influence.
Hi, my name is Natalia Noel, and I'll be talking on influence. So, the first thing we want to touch on is what is influence? Well, influence can be described as the effect a person's actions have on the attitudes, values, beliefs, or even the actions of other people. So, while you think of power as the ability or the capacity to cause a change in a person, you can think of influence as the degree of actual change. So, what extent did the person actually change? What extent with the influence? Next slide, please. Um, this is an example of influence, right? You're out with your friend and you have your mind set on a specific dish. Let's say a Caesar salad or a chicken salad. But your friend brings up how good another dish is. They don't recommend it. They're not like, hey, you should get this dish. But they just keep talking about how good the risotto is at this restaurant. When the waiter comes by, you end up ordering the risotto. You could see you were influenced by your friend. Does anybody have any examples of influence, either being influenced or influencing other people or knowing influencers?
I would say me for sure. I have definitely been influenced with regard to brand
Okay,
or switching to a certain type of product.
right. Yeah. Anyone else?
I think that a lot of people, when they hear or when they see certain things in the media, they could definitely be influenced. Like,
That's
for example, certain types of diets or fad diets you see, and they pick it up without doing the proper research. That could be how they get influenced to try it.
correct. That's a great example.
I also think that my parents influenced my beliefs, so they made the foundation of how I am right now.
That's true. That's a great example. Those are all great examples, and definitely all have some truth to it. Next slide, please. Okay, so I actually have a question. Do you think that you could influence without positional power? But before we answer, I want to remind you of a couple of things. So we're going to the next slide. Right, so remember that we said that power is the ability to influence other people to bring about desired outcomes. Positional power is the type of power you have when you have a specific rank or title in the organization. So you have a position in the organization. And then influence is the effect a person has on the actions, beliefs, attitudes of others of others. So do you think it is possible to have influence without position or power?
Yeah, I think so for sure because you have different types of power. And one example is when people have a lot of knowledge, you would definitely look up to them because you think that they are experts in their field. So you trust their judgment and you could, they could have a certain amount of power as well.
I also don't think that power, um, for want of a better word, influence, if you understand what I'm saying,
Yeah.
because there are a lot of people who aren't in positions of power who are able to be just as influential as those in power, and that's due heavily because of trend.
Yeah. You guys are doing really well and touching on some of the stuff we will talk on later on in the presentation. But the next slide actually has the answer. So the answer is yes. As somebody said, there are people who aren't in traditional positional power roles, but they still are able to influence people because of the credibility, right? They know stuff, they're experts in certain fields. Even just to the example that I gave, your friend had no positional power over you. There's no hierarchy, or there shouldn't be a hierarchy in friendships, yet you were still able to be influenced, right? They didn't recommend it, she was just talking about it, and because you respect them or you think they have good taste, you were influenced by them. So the next slide. Somebody actually just talked about this. Just because somebody has power, be it positional or any other kind, it doesn't mean that they have influence. And later on in the presentation, we will be talking a little bit more about this. We'll be giving a little anecdotes about that. Next slide. So we're going to talk about some tactics for a certain leader influence. Leaders use their power to influence others, and that does take a certain amount of skill, willingness, and to some degree trust. And that's because much of influence is interpersonal. And I'll actually bring into the types of influence. There are two types. There's a social influence, it involves things like rewards, alliances, and inspiration. Just think of like a mentor. They are an inspiration to you. You want to be where they are in life, so they inspire you. And also rewards, even in the workplace, your boss can give you, or your manager can give you incentives. Um, in rewards like not having to come in at certain times, having a more flexible schedule, etc. But there's also a more broad sense of influence when you're trying to influence an entire organization with people outside the organization. So someone said that they're influenced by brands and companies. That's a more broad sense of influence because they're influencing people outside of the company or the organization. People who use a combination of these strategies tend to be seen as having more power and more influence than those who don't. So without further ado, we'll be getting into the tactics. Next slide. The first is rational persuasion, and this was also a tactic for power. You want to use facts, data, and logical arguments to persuade your audience that an idea or request that was proposed is the best way to go about completing the desired task at hand, right? This is definitely most effective when the person has credibility due to experience or knowledge, expertise, as somebody said. So if I'm like, what do these kids have to do anything? I like acronyms and alliteration, and you'll see something pop up right now, some names. If you just press next. Right. So girl in red, you want to be a factual Fiona, always come with facts. Guy in blue, you're going to be a data Danny, come with as much statistics, data as you can. And I'm not sure if that's a girl or boy in the middle. So I'm going to be a logical Luke or Luna. The next strategy or tactic for certain influence I will be talking about is making people like you. That's on the next slide. You want to be likable, right? It is so much easier to say yes to someone you don't like, to someone you like, than someone you don't like. You definitely want to treat people fairly, want to demonstrate trust and respect, and show concern for others. So, for example, if you're presenting at a board meeting or just something like that, and someone is coughing, like you can hear that they're in obvious distress, you don't want to ask them to be quiet because you're speaking. You want to be like, "Are you okay? Do you need some water?" That'll make you more likable. People also are more likely to go out of their way for you because you make them feel good. And a point that we want to stress when it comes to influence is to never, ever, ever underestimate the importance of praise. Does anybody have any examples of when praise did that, like it benefited them? Not just in a good place. No? Okay, that's fine. I have an example. A family member. He's 2 now, but when he was younger, he could not remember me for anything. I would be playing with him, go outside for 5 minutes, come back. He doesn't know who I am, right? But when I started praising him, like, "Oh yeah, I like your shirt. You know, you look good. You put it on for yourself, things like that. You're so strong. You're so smart." He remembered me, and now he loves me. He literally can't get enough of me. So never, ever, ever underestimate the importance of praise. Next slide. You want to rely on the rule of reciprocity. You do gain power by having something others value. So you want to take that power that you have and turn it into influence by sharing the things that you have. It can be your time, your resources, your services, or even just emotional support. So if you see someone crying in the office, you might want to just sneak past them, offer them like, "Are you okay? Is everything okay?" The unspoken law is that if you do favors to people, you can generally expect them back. So if you're ever crying in the office and you're just upset, you can expect the person to return the favor. Next slide. As we said, turn the power next into influence. You want to develop allies. Allies help you, the leader, to accomplish your goal, and by reciprocating, you also develop a network of allies. You want to take time to talk to your followers outside of groups and meetings, and take time to talk to other leaders outside of formal meetings. This will help you to understand what the other person hopes to achieve, and consulting with one another also ensures that everyone is on the same page. Now we will be telling you a little story with pictures, like Pictionary. So next slide. This is Philip's story. So in 1997, Philip and Mac joined companies, aka Mercer. After 5 years, Philip was supposed to resign and Mac would take control. Um, Mac didn't really mind Philip being in charge for 5 years because he had more things to do in the Mercer, right? So they ended up shaking hands the next picture will show you them shaking hands and just agreeing that Philip would be in charge for the next 5 years. Next. Okay. On the next slide, you'll see that Philip put things in place that he would be in charge. So he was being a bit two-faced. He gave his people privileges and so forth. He would give them extra hours, things like that. Next. Right? And on the next slide, you'll see that there was a struggle for power. If the picture would come up, right? There was a struggle for power. Mark tried to become co-CEO, but it was too late. The power dynamic was already established in the company. Philip gained control of the company by putting people loyal to him on the board of directors. So he got rid of everyone who wasn't loyal to him, and he made them the board of directors, so they would choose him to be CEO. Next. Right, so that's him getting rid of everybody. And on the next slide, you will see the people leaving. In 2005, good high-level executives left the company in teams. So they were leaving in groups because of their loyalty to Mac. The next picture, you'll see that he's crying. Philip is crying because shareholders are calling. High-level executives who used to work at the company are calling and wondering what is going on. In the next slide, you'll see that Philip had to resign. This wasn't only due to managerial issues. There were also some financial problems going on. But in the end, Mac ended up taking over. So bye bye, Philip. If you click next, and hello, Mac. Right? Does anybody understand like why I brought up the story or what was the value behind the story? No? Okay, that's fine. The mistake that Philip made was that he didn't have allies at all levels of the company, right? If Mac didn't have allies, those high level executives wouldn't leave. The people who left because they did not like what was going on in the company, and that affected everything. The next strategy that's on the next slide I'll be talking about is asking for what you want. If you don't ask, you really can't expect to receive. So what you want to do is make your vision, goals, and desired changes apparent. Do not be cryptic. You want to be clear and be assertive. That doesn't mean being assertive does not mean that you necessarily get your way, but you did what you could to be understood by the other people, right? And most of the times, other options are less well defined, so people will go with your proposal. For example, if you have A to Z and the other person has A to D, even though yours might not be as strong, because you're so thorough, people will be more likely to go with you. Next. That was being clear and being assertive. You want to remember the principle of scarcity. That's the next strategy or tactic. People definitely want more of what they don't have, right? So frame your request in such a way that you highlight the unique benefits and exclusive information that you are providing. Release information that is not broadly available and that supports your ideas or proposals. Let people know that they're getting a sneak peek, right? It will capture their attention and make them more likely to support you in your position. Because I guess it makes them feel as though, they're involved in something that not everyone has. And then the final strategy that we have is to extend formal authority with expertise and credibility. Someone mentioned it, and it was also mentioned in one of the previous slides. You want to be knowledgeable, you want to be credible, and you want to be trustworthy. And the reason for that is influence depends on personal rather than positional power, as we explained before. I'll be handing it over to my colleague and deal with you.
Hello, everyone. So now we'll be talking about popular influencers that we have and may have had in our society. So firstly, we have Steve Jobs. He's an American entrepreneur, an industrial designer, business magnate, media professor, and investor. Not forgetting, he was the CEO of Apple. Apart from being the skilled person that he was, he used his influential tactic when he was pitching and launching the iPhone 1 back in 2007. Now we have, secondly, Sam Walton. This is an American businessman, entrepreneur, best known for founding the retailers for Walmart and Sam's Club. Fun fact is, he was the richest man in America at a point in time. The Walmart stores grew over the years because he was also one of the world's significant private boss. Lastly, we have Andrew Carnegie. He is an American industrialist and philanthropist. He was also one of the richest men in the history of America. Apart from his power and influence, he took his wisdom and influence to help establish few colleges and even NGOs. Andrew was able to help make a difference before he passed away. So here are some types of influence. Firstly, we have positional influence, as we had mentioned before. So this type of influence is what comes with a title or a position, but not because they have a certain title doesn't mean that they are able to do so. Why? Because they are limited. These types of leaders leads from the power that that title or position holds. Example, the government. And another example of this would be managers, because they have the right to make certain decisions because of their job. Secondly, we have domineering influence. These types of influential leaders usually come across dominant. Most of the time, these people look down on workers. They use harsh tones, threats, and the list goes on. Lastly, we have interpersonal influence. It's a type of social influence, as mentioned before. This can be both positive and negative. An example would be social media influencers. For me, I could relate 100%. I am guilty because I'm obsessed with skin products, and we went from just using soap and water to serum to moisturizer to clay to all sorts of different products, and there's like 5 different steps you have to take in these days. So that's an example of this. So these type of influencers are assertive and persuasive, as my colleague mentioned, that we are able to trust their judgment, and we say, okay, they are the leaders, they know what they're talking about, so we tend to believe in whatever they say. This can become the very dark if a very persuasive leader encourages a product or idea that can harm us or even animals. So example of this would be maybe like drug lords. They aren't like legal business people, but they are business people on the low. So say for instance, if a youth comes to that person to get drugs like every week, they are destroying people's lives slowly, but people don't care because, money is a big thing when it comes to having that power and influence. So now we are going to talk about a little bit about the psychology behind influence. So here are the 6 principles as was mentioned before: authority, reciprocity, social validation, consensus or social proof, liking, and scarcity. So I believe that we should understand why people do what they do. So I'm going to tell you about the question behavior effect. The question behavior effects refers to the influence of any sort of questioning, such as intentions, predictions of future, and measure of satisfaction. So clients and customers and people on the whole do not like to be told what to do. Our brain tends to do the opposite. Because of this, they don't feel a sense of freeness. So here's an example. We can change our statement into a question. So instead of saying, I think you should go with this fluffy top instead of this blue top. Or you could come across and say, which one would you like? Would you like this blue top or this plain top? So I give them that openness to feel confident that they are able to choose and that freeness. So here we are going to speak about some positive and negative when it comes to being having power and influence. So number one, they are able to encourage clients and change their mind if they are selling a good or services. So if the company wants to create or sell a product, they would be able to do so because they understand the power, the art of power and influence. Secondly, growth for the company. So when a company has growth, it means new client. Thirdly, making profits. Once you have more sales, you get more revenues, which is profits. Number four, building healthy relationship. This is when clients have personal or healthy relationship with companies. They are able to move around freely. They will be able to feel to come to work and get the job done. On the negative aspect of it, it can lead to expensive consequences, low income due to bad product, service, or even repetition. As example, this can be an example of the job that I mentioned before. Number two, we can mislead others. If a person have a high position, they can cause continuous negativity if their intentions are unpleasant. That goes back to the same example. And number three, loss of employees. Employees may leave the job because of poor treatment and discomfort, as mentioned before. As you can see, where there is positive and negative leaders, it affects everyone around them. Lastly, I would like to tell you all about the DISC module. The DISC model is an acronym that stands for 4 main personality profiles described in the model. It is made up of dominance, influence, steadiness, and consciousness. So these are just some characteristics that these high people of power and influence have. So under dominance, we have direct, firm, result-oriented. Under influence, we have outgoing, enthusiastic, optimistic, and high-spirited. Under steadiness, we have humble, patient, and accommodating. Under consciousness, we have analytical, precise, and systematic. I'll hand you over to my colleague as we end our presentation today.
Okay, so I will be concluding this presentation. We talked about power and we described it as a person's ability to control the activities of other individuals. We spoke about the types of power, there's legitimate, coercive, reverent, charismatic or charisma, reward, moral, connection, found, and also gave you some definitions. For those, we talked about the tactics that can be used to help with power. We spoke about the myths or misconceptions around or about power. We spoke about influence and give you a definition for that. It can be described as the effect a person's action have on the values, attitudes, beliefs, or actions of other people. We spoke about some tactics to assert an influence, rational persuasion, you're going to be likable, you're going to develop allies on all levels, you're going to rely on the rule of reciprocity, but remember the principle of scarcity. You definitely want to ask what you want and extend formal authority with expertise and credibility. We spoke about some influence. We touched on the psychology behind influence. We spoke about some positives and negatives of influence. And finally, we spoke about the DIS model influencer characteristics. So, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, giving us the opportunity to present, and we hope that this was an informative presentation that everyone enjoyed. These are references for the pictures and information, stuff like that.